Well, here we are again. It's kind of dim in here. I hope you can see my face okay. I know that's sort of got a reddish tint to it because of the way this thing is. It's a sort of a blustery, cold, dark day out there, so I don't have a lot of light coming in through the shades. Anyway, I want to get started on this thing so we can get done. And this is a Dodge pickup that came into the body shop for repairs. I was over there helping out a little bit at the Ford place. This is after I started teaching. And they said there's a body shop job around there they've been working on for a while. It came in for some work, and it came in when it was cooler weather. It's been here for when it was warmer weather. It's been here for a while. And they were telling me that it just all of a sudden decided it wasn't going to start. And it spin and spin and spin. So I go out there to have a look at it, and it's important now to remember it was like 40 degrees out there for the first time in the season. Every other time they started it, it was nice and warm. Alright, so the Ford body shop manager was accustomed to looking on the Fords for an inertia switch. You know, on the cars it'll be in the trunk, on the vehicles it'll be the SUVs, it'll be under the dash on the right or under here along the top of the carpet. On the later model vehicles, it's actually built into the engine controller. And so, you know, even the newest ones don't have that, but they've had them. Toyotas have got them sometimes on some models. Nissans have got them sometimes. Dodges and Chevrolets never have them. But basically the inertia switch is there so it'll cut off the fuel pump if you have an accident, so that you don't wind up having gas squirting all over the road, you know, while you're out after a crash. So they don't want to set fire to everything. Doesn't have an inertia switch. Well, we spun the engine and we smelled gas. And I said, okay, I got to thinking about the general way that things were being done on this body shop truck, because they crank it up, pull it in the shop, crank it up, pull it back out. If they do that enough, like they do on used car lots, they move the vehicles around, you know, sometimes. And it's kind of funny because they wind up in a situation where they absolutely cannot get it to start. And I've actually seen some of the ones with low tension piston rings just spin like the timing, like they had jumped time. But actually it just washed the cylinder walls down, and it's, you know, because they crank it up without letting it warm up. It's on cold enrichment. They drive it to another parking place, they shut it off, and then they drive it to this parking place and that one, moving them around. You know, they shuffle the cars around on a used car lot so it'll look like they got some new stuff. And what they'll do, they don't do this on new car lots quite as bad, but if they crank it enough and move it around enough without letting it get warm, they not only are sludging up the engine, but they're also wetting all the plugs. All right, and I've actually had to squirt a little oil, take the plug out, squirt a little oil in there on the ones with low tension piston rings. The older vehicles with high tension piston rings, like they used to have, you might have heard one of those has been sitting up a long time that doesn't have any oil on the cylinder wall. They're going rah, 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 you know, turning real slow. One way or another, I was thinking maybe that's what's going on here. So I went ahead and I said, I'm going to pull the coil wire and I'm going to stretch the spark. What that does is it raises the amount of spark that's available to the plugs, juices them up a little hotter. Sometimes that will overcome. In this particular case, with it held to the floor on clear flood mode, which is supposed to turn the injectors off, most vehicles have this, some don't. All right, so held it to the floor, had the guy hold it to the floor, and holding the spark and letting it jump. It basically tried to start. With the spark stretched and the fuel injectors not clicking, the engine sputtered and tried to fire on some of the cylinders, which is something it hadn't done with normal spark while spinning the engine with accelerator release. So that's telling me that the plugs are kind of fouled, because you know, if you've got a misfiring cylinder on an older car that's got spark plug wires and you stretch the spark and it starts firing on that cylinder, you know that spark plug's fouled. That's just a little rule of thumb I learned at a gas station back in the mid-70s. Okay, well, to pull all the plugs out, I found Bosch Platinums that were sooty and gas fouled. And I said, well, this, you know, I knew that the plugs were sooty, and I don't really, with all due respect, I don't really like Bosch Platinum plugs anyway. I mean, they're supposed to be the cat's meow and all that, and I've seen a lot of people put them in there. But in my dealer days, sometimes I would fix Ford vehicles that showed up with a drivability problem, but all that would be wrong with them was they'd have Bosch spark plugs in them. Okay, so I said, all right, so here we got, I like to use NGK or Denso on Asian brands, Delco and GM stuff. In other words, I like to use the brand that came in the vehicle when it was built. There's a lot of different ways people think about that. I have gone to Autolite on, if they didn't have Motorcraft, I'd use Autolite. Some people don't like Autolite. Everybody's got their own idea about spark plugs, but I just try to stay with OEM as much as possible. And I use Champion on a Dodge because they were OE on this truck. Champion is probably one of my least favorite spark plugs, but I'm not going to get into that. I didn't really think new plugs would fix it, but they don't cost much, so let's just give it a shot, right? With a new set of Champion plugs in there, I smelled as much gas as I heard before, but it still didn't start. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time spinning it because I didn't want to wet these new ones to the point to where, you know, they were going to have to be cleaned or something. Well, so much for the cold start short run theory. This was something else. So it's time to grab the DRB3. So I grabbed the DRB3, had to walk around to the service department to get it, brought it back. You know, that dealership was at the time also a Jeep franchise, so we had the DRB3. All right, so I was working next to the body shop by the fence. It was cold, and you know, I say cold, not cold for some of you guys that are up north, but it was chilly for the first time in the season like it is today here. It's like 40 degrees. All right, fuel pressure, well, high fuel pressure can cause that, but that's not usually what's wrong with one of these. So I'm gonna, you know, I would eventually get around to checking the fuel pressure if everything else came up wrong. So I went ahead and looked at other stuff first. So I got two codes. I got one for the IAT sensor, and I got the other one for a lean code. Well, there's no use in chasing a lean code if it won't start. Okay, so let's go ahead and go after this other thing. I'm smelling fuel anyway, so how much of a chance is there of it being lean? Well, the PID data was really revealing. On the DRB3, a reading of 104 degrees on my intake air temperature, and look at the engine coolant temp sensor. It's 41, which matches up with ambient temperature. Now, if you've had a vehicle that's been sitting 3 or 4 hours, and you pull up a set of temperature readings, like for a bunch of temperature sensors, that goes through with pressure on ones that have pressure sensors, like some of your diesels and all. But the point is, all of these, if it's been set for 3 or 4 hours, all of the temperature readings should be close to the same. If you see one that's way off in left field like this one right here, and look at your voltage, it's 5 volts. Then that tells you something's rotten in Denmark. Shouldn't be 5 volts. On one of your 2-wire sensors is fed with reference voltage, it's going to be about 4.6 usually, even if, you know, things are all the way down. This Dodge is a little different from some of your, you know, Fords and Chevys. But I'm looking at an issue right here that I don't like. All right, so I measure this right here. What's wrong with this picture? My meter, I'm getting real world reading of 5 volts right here. Whether the sensor is plugged in or whether it's unplugged, I'm still getting 5 volts. And that's telling me I've found an issue here. Now, what does the intake air temperature sensor do? You know, it seems to me like it would always cause the same problem if it was faulty, right? Not necessarily. A hot wire MAF sensor, mass airflow, sometimes double as the IAT, but it provides barrel information. A lot of mass airflow vehicles have an IAT in the inlet hose in addition to having a mass airflow. All right? Old Fords used to call that air charge temperature sensor. They'd get all messed up under there and all carboned up, and they'd get where they were open, and it would just puff black smoke like you wouldn't believe. You know, that was back in the early 80s. J1930 says you got to call it, and that's the SAE thing for terminology and stuff. They say you're supposed to call it an intake air temperature sensor, and incidentally, J1930 also says an alternator should be called a generator, so that's why you're seeing that a lot nowadays. On the older Fords, an open intake air temperature sensor meant rich running and fouling plugs. Well, on old Renaults, you would have a engine coolant sensor that would be bad, and when you'd have your first little cold snap, it would have issues about it not starting and whatnot. And so, but the intake air temperature sensor on those cars and on some of your older Jeeps, like 87 to 90, would basically just cause it to stumble. They wouldn't cause it to run rich. So you won't always have the same symptom because of a bad IAT. But anyway, the Dodge on this one, with that bad IAT, was overfueling. Why? OBD2 OEM programming calls for a workable substituted value. Since minus 40 degrees didn't make sense, the OEM PCM substituted 101, or actually 104, which would, paired with a 41-degree engine, cause overfueling. It basically got in some tables where it was dumping way too much fuel in there. If the conditions had been accurate, if the prevailing conditions were that you had 100-degree air and 41-degree coolant, this would have been normal, but you didn't have 104-degree air, you had 40-degree air, and so this whole thing didn't match reality. Now you got to remember, if you've got an OBD2 generic like scan tool and you plug in, you're never going to see a substituted value like this. You'll always see 40 below if the sensor is open and you're looking in your data stream on your old OBD2 generic. The OEM is the one that's going to lie about it and say it's 104. So it's a good idea to look at your OBD2 generic, and there's actually 2 rooms in every engine controller too. You may have a code that will be stored in one room but not in the other. That's rare, but I've seen it happen. So just always remember to go in your OBD2 room and also look in your OEM room too. So look at your enhanced and your other one. Both of them together, if you look at them, will sometimes give you better information. Now you got to glance at the sensor. It looks like a brand new sensor, doesn't it? All right, and it's wide open. You measure it from here to here, nothing there. All right, now let's have some fun. If you got a potentiometer with about 50,000 ohms of resistance, that's a pretty good round figure for this. Some of you guys might have used some of these gauge testers, you know, it's got 3 little pots in them and you can set them for any reading you want to see if your gas gauge is working and all that. Well, that's kind of where I got this idea. And I figured out a long time ago, I could take a little cheap pot. Heck, you can buy these online for $3 or $4. They don't cost very much. And you can get them for various different resistance ranges if you want to. And you unplug, like for example, your engine coolant sensor, put it in there. You can trick all kinds of things into going on, the way it runs, a fan and all kinds of stuff. I've been doing this for 30 years. On this short story here, I had a guy that I had placed at the GM dealer. And most of the stuff he's working on is a lot newer than this, but he had a 2001 Chevrolet pickup in there that the daytime running lights wouldn't work. You know, the daytime running lights on these things, the way they work is whenever you back outside, if you're in the daylight and you're in drive, after about 45 seconds, those daytime running lights are going to come on. Well, his daytime running lights wouldn't come on. And so he did all of his diagnostics and he measured resistances and all that. And so he replaced that little sensor in the dash, that little ambient light sensor. They still didn't work. So he called the hotline. They didn't know what to tell him. They said, well, I don't know, you know, that should have fixed it. And so he ordered another one, and it still didn't fix it. And so he came over there to talk to me about it. And I says, all right, take this potentiometer and connect it in place of that ambient light sensor and see if you can get those lights to come on. And so when he put that that potentiometer in place of that ambient light sensor and dialed in the correct amount of ohms, the lights came on. And whenever he dialed away from that, they went off. And he said, so what does that mean? I said, that means you've got a bad sensor. And so he said, well, he went back and he came back later. He said, I have ordered 2 more of those sensors and it still didn't fix it. And I said, that's all it can be. I said, I've got a 2001 out there, one of them trainer trucks. I know they work on it. Pull that sensor off, go try it on your truck, see what happens. When he put that one on there, it took care of the problem. All right, and so basically that's what that sensor looks like. That's where it's at. And so what he did was he put his potentiometer in there, just like I'm talking about, and he dialed it in. As long as you're on the middle and one of the outside legs, it doesn't matter which one. It just means your knob will work the other way. All right, so the long and the short of it is, he verified that he needed this part here because he had taken everything else out of the loop, right? All right, so you can connect the 50,000 ohm potentiometer to the ECT sensor and adjust it watching the scan tool readings and cause the fan to kick off and on. Now be aware of the fact that some vehicles won't ever turn on the fan unless the engine's running. So you may have to have the engine running before you dial these numbers in. Just be aware of that. All right, so you'll know what the temperature of the fan comes on if you're watching the scan tool and dialing your knob on your pot. If you watch that temperature on the scan tool and that fan kicks on, you'll know what time, when it comes on and when it goes off. And that's one of the tests you can do to see if your fan is being operated the way it's supposed to. All right, so I broke out my pot. And you got to be really careful when you're hooking into these wires here. You don't want to spread those terminals. I get little tiny wires like a little single filament wire that's very small, that's smaller than the pin, so I'm not going to spread the pins and ruin the terminal. So I put those in there, and I dialed in. See where I'm hooked up? I just hooked up in the middle of one of the other ones, and I dialed in a temperature that matched the ECT reading, and the truck fired right up every time. So I could basically figure out what was going on without actually going to buy a part. So what do we think probably happened? The check engine light probably came on this guy's truck. When it's warm weather, he's driving around. He says, wonder why my check engine light's on. Think I'll go by the parts house. I'm just postulating here. I don't know for sure what happened. So he goes by the parts house. They plug it in. They get a reading. It says, oh, you got a bad engine intake air temperature sensor. We got one of those right in here on the shelf. So they go back in here. They pull one off the shelf that they don't know it, but it's a bad one. It's open. Don't know what brand the part is, but they screw it in there and they plug it in. He's got the same problem. He had a bad one, they replaced it with another bad one, and they're thinking, well, it couldn't have been the same thing, right? There's no way it could be the same thing. So they just figured, well, he said, it ain't running bad, I'll just cover up the check engine light with my girlfriend's picture and we'll drive like that. And anyway, we wound up at the body shop over there and the weather got cold. There you go. Now, here's test questions. Test technician A says a running problem that occurs only after repair work is done must be related in some way to whatever repair work was done. Is that true or false? You know, because the technician A and B questions are like a pair of true or false questions altogether. Technician B says disconnecting the battery will prevent engine controller damage while performing body repairs that involve electric welding. Who's correct, A or B? All right. If holding a spark plug wire a fraction of an inch away from the tip of the plug with the engine running eliminates a steady misfire while the spark stretched, what does that mean? A, the plug wire is bad. B, the plug is cracked. C, the plug is fouled. D, none of the above. Technician A says a flooded engine won't start because the spark is traveling through the gasoline coating on the tip of the plug instead of jumping across the gap. Technician B says a diesel engine can be flooded to the point that it won't start. Who's correct about that? All right, on a vehicle that's been cold soaking all day, a scan tool shows these readings. ECT 53, IAT 53, transmission oil temperature 80, minus 80, or not. This is not minus, minus, minus. I actually put that dash in there to point to it. That was really poorly drawn on my part, so I apologize for that. Let's just say it was 53, 53, and 80, right? Technician B says a scan tool, if it's an aftermarket brand, should properly be calibrated using the R plus M divided by 2 method. Who's correct about that? A technician retrieves a diagnostic trouble code that indicates an open throttle position sensor circuit. He clears the code, it returns immediately. At this point, what should he do? There's your choices. Replace the TP, check the data stream, compare it to real-world data using a voltmeter, ohm out the circuit between the PCM and TP sensor, or none of the above. Now, remember, I'm talking about at this point, what's the wisest thing for him to do? All right, on a vehicle with a no start, there's spark but no injector pulse with the engine spinning. There's power feeding the injectors. The scan tool data stream reads a good RPM signal, but no commanded pulse width. When carb cleaner is sprayed into the throttle body with the engine spinning, the engine starts and continues to run, but when you shut it off, it won't restart unless you spray carburetor cleaner in there again. I don't know if you've seen that before, but I have. What's the most likely cause? Bad TP, bad ECT, bad map sensor, none of the above. Here's a question 7. A no start due to a whole set of city plugs can be caused by A, fuel pressure, B, consistently short start and run, C, an electronic fuel and control concern, or any of the above. Test question 8. A technician A says abnormal long fuel trim readings can be caused by a missing oil filter cap O-ring. Technician B says an incorrect mass airflow sensor reading can cause abnormal long fuel trim readings, but the mass airflow reading may appear to be normal. And who is correct? A, B, C, or A, B, C, both or neither. Technician A says late valve timing can cause a map sensor equipped vehicle to run rich. Technician B says installing an aggressively ground camshaft can cause a map sensor equipped vehicle to run rich. Who is correct about that? And here's your last question. Technician A says a PCM control coolant fan system can be checked with a 50,000 ohm potentiometer connected in place of the engine coolant temperature sensor. And B says some PCM control fans won't operate unless the engine is running. Okay, you got that? All right, let's talk about this a little bit now. Okay. Test question 1. Neither one of those is right. Sometimes a repair that is done will cause another problem, but it doesn't always mean that you did something wrong if it comes back. Now, all of us would like to say that we've never had a comeback that was our fault. Nobody that says that is going to be telling the truth. Sometimes we miss things, but just because we worked on it doesn't mean it has to be something that we did that caused the problem. My dad put a set of brakes on my sister's car one time. The radio quit working. She swore it was his fault, but it turned out it was blown fuse. All right. Technician B says disconnecting the battery will prevent engine controller damage while performing body repairs that involve electric welding. That is not true. You have to completely disconnect the controllers in order to prevent damage. Now, if you hook it depends on where you hook your ground wire on your welding cable. If you hook it on one end of the car and weld on the other end, you're asking for trouble. If you're going to weld on an A-frame or something like that, if you hook it right there by where you're welding, you're not likely to cause any trouble. But if you hook it back there on the bumper and you're welded up in the front somewhere, you're liable to fry all kinds of controllers. So just be really careful about that. If holding a spark plug a fraction of an inch away, you're jumping the spark a little bit right to the tip of the plug, and it starts firing on that plug, that's a fouled plug. If it one's got a distributor cap on it, and if you're pulling the wires trying to see which one causes a misfire to go away, and it starts running better, that means you got carbon tracks in the distributor cap. All right, typically. All right, so technician A says a flooded engine won't start because the plug spark traveling through the gas. That's right. It's going to take the path of least resistance, and it's easier for it to run through all that wet gas than it is to jump the gap. So that keeps it from sparking and firing. A diesel engine, believe it or not, can be flooded to the point to where it won't start. You put too much fuel in there, there's no way it's going to start. You're going to see a lot of white smoke, and that's all you're going to get. All right? On a vehicle that's been cold sulking all day, neither one of these guys is right. You're basically going to be looking for problems with your transmission oil temperature sensor if the vehicle has been soaking for a long time, and one of them is read if this one doesn't agree with those other two. All right, technician receives a diagnostic trouble code that indicates an open TP sensor circuit. Check the data stream and compare it to real world data. Get your meter and go into those, go in. I like to go from signal return, but I have just gone from battery ground. Go into that signal wire, see if it agrees with what you're getting on the scan tool. You might be surprised sometimes. Now, if the scan tool shows it's open and you're getting a good reading here, and it's a 2-wire sensor, then you're going to be looking for problems somewhere else, maybe a possible PCM or whatever. All right. Now, on a vehicle with a no start, you got no injector faults with the engine spinning. Power feeding the injector, scan tool data stream is good RPM signal. That tells us it has what it needs to fire those injectors, especially if it has spark. So if it's got injector pulse and it's got spark, then you basically know your crank sensor is working on one that's no starting. But this one here has spark but no injector pulse. All right, when you shoot a little carburetor cleaner in there, just a little, it fires up and it keeps running until you switch it off, but it won't start back up. What that's going to be, the TP sensor is reading wide open throttle, and it basically, the reason it fires up whenever you spray carburetor spray in there is on most of them, even if they have clear flood mode, and most of them do, not all of them do. When you spray a little carburetor cleaner in there and the RPM goes above 400, above 400 it starts firing the injectors and it takes off and starts running. And so that's one good indicator that you're looking at a bad TP sensor. Now, to be perfectly honest, you're probably going to be pulling the codes anyway, and you probably would have seen a code for your TP sensor. However, sensors can have in-range failures where they're floating around. It may be in range but way up close to wide open throttle, and if it doesn't have any kind of a rationality check it can do, a code may not be thrown for that. May or it may not be. Alright, no start due to a whole set of sooty plugs can be high fuel pressure, consistently short start and run cycles like the used car syndrome, an electronic fuel control concern. Any of the above can cause that. Long fuel trim readings can be caused by a missing oil filter cap O-ring because the PCV system will pull some unmetered air in there, and the unmetered air going in there is going to confuse the oxygen sensor, and it's going to adjust the fuel trims typically to the positive side because see, it's going to see less air coming in than what's actually there, and it's going to be lean, and so it's going to have to jack the fuel trims up to balance everything out. You can actually demonstrate this by watching your fuel trims by pulling the oil, and while pulling the oil filter cap off. Let's be aware of that. Technician B says incorrect mass airflow reading can cause abnormal long fuel readings, but the mass airflow reading may appear to be normal. I've seen them be just a tiny little bit off and cause the fuel trim readings to go off really bad. And you could actually just Sometimes you just got to put a mass airflow sensor on there that you know for sure is a good one after you've smoke tested the intake and all that kind of thing to make sure there are no vacuum leaks anywhere. So just be aware of that too. All right, question 9, Technician A says, late valve timing can cause a map sensor of the quick vehicle to run rich. It can. Late valve timing does what? It gives you low engine vacuum. Low engine vacuum is considered to be high engine load. That's going to make you puff black smoke and run rich. Installing an aggressively ground camshaft can cause a map sensor of a quick vehicle to run rich. That's right, because at idle, it may run fine going down the road, but at idle, it's going to run rich because aggressively ground camshaft is going to give you lower engine vacuum idling. And your map sensor is going to be confused by that. If you have to put a cam in one, you probably need to go get a mass airflow conversion kit and put on it, right? All right, so both those guys are right. Question 10, both of those are right. You knew that. That was the easiest question in the whole test. And I hope you got something out of this. I put it together just for my subscribers because I know you guys like to hear me talk, probably more than I like to hear myself talk anyway. Anyway, leave me some reviews and some comments. Let me know if you got any good out of this.